Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Mavis. I'm the host for the class, and I have a nice introduction here. This was written by Jim Oberly, who is the curriculum committee chairman, and he was the one who set up a lot of the details for today in conjunction with Tora and the rest of our presenters. So bear with me while I read. Sunrise Senior College is pleased to sponsor today's class, Mapping the Dennys River Over 9,000 Years. To learn more about Senior College and its offerings, please go to our website at Machias /Sunrise Senior College. The National Endowment for the Humanities is in partnership with the American Historical Association, announced a grant competition in 2021 intended to support the work of regional and local historical societies. The Dennys River Historical Society, DRHS, competed for and won one of the grants with the promise of making a map that shows changes in the Dennys River watershed over time. Today's speakers include 4 of the leaders of the project. They supervise the work of many volunteers. DRHS is led by Ron Windhorst, president of the society. Ron is a senior minister at Dennisville Congregational Church, Perry Congregational Church, and Robinson Congregational Church. The executive director of the project is Dr. Colin Windhorst. He holds a Ph.D. in history from UMO and has supervised many DRHS grants. Ron and Colin assembled a skilled team of researchers, including Dr. Tora Johnson, who holds a Ph.D. in environmental science from the University of Oregon and headed UMM's GIS laboratory. Patricia Tilton is a 2023 grad with honors from UMM GIS program and served as lead data analyst and cartographer on the project. Louise Merriam, who's on Zoom, holds postgraduate degrees in information science and history from Columbia University and University of Minnesota. She helped oversee the database management for the project. So first we will hear, I think, from Ron Windhorst. Thank you.
Before we get too far, we need to make sure folks on Zoom can hear us. And so you can hear fine. Okay, that's, I can, and it looks like it's going through. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, you'll want to.
Now, being a preacher, I have to limit myself very carefully. And so I'm going to read these little thoughts that I've put together for you. For more than half a century, living on the banks of the Dennys River has inspired us not only with the fascination of its 2 miles of estuary, with its high and low tides at our very front door, but all of its natural beauty in summer and in the ice season, as well as the local stories and all the legends over the years. We've heard so many things about the river across the years. It's fascinated me, and I wanted to do something about it for the longest time. But I want to say basically this: compared with the great rivers of the world, such as the Nile, the Amazon, the Yangtze, the Mississippi, all these great rivers of the world, The Dennys River, with mere 18 miles from Medibemps Lake to the sea, seem very insignificant with all these great rivers of the world, but it is not. Make no mistake about it, it is not. This little river has been in continuous use by humans for at least 9,000 years. That is, to put it in perspective, that is 4,300 years before the first pyramid in Egypt was built. It has been in continuous use by human beings. I have always wanted, as I mentioned, to see a history of the river undertaken, but our little historical society has simply lacked the resources in every respect. However, with a generous grant from the American Historical Association, we have engaged the resources of historians, University of Maine and Machias faculty and students, Passamaquoddy tribe, and many professionals and friends to make all of this happen. And there is a great deal of work that lies behind what looks very simple to you on the screen. To each and all of us, we offer our humble and hearty thanks from the Dennys River Historical Society.
Yes. Yeah, you can stand here. You just need.
Yeah, really all can see me. Oh, wonderful.
There's no escaping the owl. So can you hear me all right, everybody? Okay. Thanks to Tora's introduction, I need no introduction. So I am the program director at the Historical Society. And as Ron said, the dream of exploring and presenting the history of the river as a whole has engaged us for years. We live on one end of it, that is Dennysville and Edmonds. I'm going to assume a certain amount of geographical knowledge. And the river stretches to its source at the Medibemps Lake, about 18 miles, more or less. And then, of course, from Dennysville and Edmonds, it expands into the Dennys Bay, and which is then part of Coxcook Bay. So we have, it may seem small, but once you're actually on the ground and thinking, now, where is the history of this river, and how do we track it? Trish knows very well. I dragged her around this time last year. We were tromping up streets and fields and all over the place because we knew there was something. So this is a project that has been long in the making. And last time, I don't know if we mentioned, but I really feel that I should. There is an unseen partner here, and that is Rebecca Hobart, who attended normal school here years ago, 40 years teaching fourth grade at Lubec, lived in Edmonds. This is her history of the Dennys River, and without it, we would be sadly lacking. We lost Rebecca about 10 years ago, but she was a force for local history. She knew the history of the area and inspired Ron. She inspired me, who, of course, we didn't grow up here, so we had to learn all of these things. And she was very patient with us when we said, "Would you say that again, please?" So here's this opportunity, and when the AHA, American Historical Association, advertised this grant, this is something that we can sink our teeth into. The partnership, we couldn't have done it without. Obviously, we're all working from different backgrounds and institutions, and not just, we weren't all historians, or as a geographer. Geographers measure change in place. We look at change in time as historians. And there were technical expertise. There was Tricia's knowledge of spreadsheets and data analysis that was absolutely essential. So there were a lot of components to this project. And it gave us a web-based access to the river. We mapped it out over 9,000 years because that's the time frame on which there is actual evidence. Although our first era was actually, as you can see over there, the geology of the Dennys River. And Dom Winsky, who was been one of our students over the years and now is a glaciologist at University of Maine at Orono, he helped us put that part together because, of course, the geology is the part that changes slowly. We talk about historical time and geological time. And that goes back probably to 11,000, 12,000 years ago. There are eskers in Medibemps. If you've ever driven over Route 191, as if you're going either to or from Machias, you're actually driving over the remains of ancient glaciers, and we believe that the sea actually came to Medibemps Lake, and as the sea levels dropped, Medibemps Lake appeared. It's really very shallow. So we began with the geology, but the human history begins with the ancestral Passamaquoddy people. We use the word ancestral because as a tribe, the Passamaquoddy are known to have been here around in the 1700s in our time. But there was human habitation from the beginning. That is a sketch made by one of the Passamaquoddy tribal members when they were excavating the village there that is now called Natomna, which means our ancestors' place. What it was called back then, we don't know. But if you look at the geography of our part of eastern Maine and the Dennys River, you can see that there are basically two routes to the sea from the inland area around Peter Dana Point and Indian Township, where we know is the inland tribal ground. You can either go down the St. Croix River, in which case you get to what we call St. Stephen, and then you have to go down the falls, and then you're fighting against the tide to get out into Passamaquoddy Bay, or you could go overland through a series of short carries to Medibemps Lake, and then at this spot, we're really right at the very source of the Dennys River. You can actually see a little bit of it. It's kind of bluish back there, but that's the lake above it. And from there, you're simply going downstream. And if you had a choice of going against the tide for 10 or 12 miles to get to Pleasant Point, or going downstream and then catching the outgoing tide to Pleasant Point, which would you choose? So we think it was a strategic location. We know that from archaeological evidence there was evidence of food being gathered in the winter and in the summer and in the spring and in the fall and sometimes in the winter. Several archaeologists at the moment, Arthur Anderson and Dave Hynek, have been working on excavating that site and others as well. That site was actually worked on by the University of Maine Farmington's archaeology program in the very late 1900s. There's a story, but I'm going to save some of that for later. The colonial era really we're just a little blip on the radar, on the historical radar, because we know that the Native American people were here for most of the actual time frame. We know, of course, about Champlain's famous winter on St. Croix Island. There were probably Europeans before him, but they came and went. That's assumed for fishing and perhaps other natural resources. But that was the first known attempt to plant the colony that actually survived over the winter. Barely, but they survived. They lost about a third of their number to scurvy and other diseases. So that then takes us right up to the colonial era, would include, of course, the great struggle with our brothers and sisters in Great Britain, to the early American Republic and the establishment of the country that we all know now. And through to the ending of the War of 1812, which most places ended in 1814, but here the British didn't vacate Eastport until 1818. So we rounded it up to 1820, but that was the point at which the Republic and the new American era could really put down its roots. And what did they do here along the Dennys River? Dennys River that was a lumbering river, a lumbering community. And at the time, it seemed an inexhaustible supply of lumber. But as we all know now, that wasn't the case. And so that brings a growing awakening of the need for conservation, brings us to 1930 in the present. And when we get to that point, I will explain why we chose that date, 1930. So this is the story that we laid out in our application to AHA very briefly. And I think I need to go to the next slide, don't I, Tora? Should I just click on it? There we go. Is this you? Okay. There we go.
So a while back, Humanities and others formed this idea and reached out to me. And at the time, I was directing the Geographic Information Systems Laboratory here at Machias. And they asked, could we engage students in a project that would be essentially a digital humanities project? So creating a digital tool that would be accessible to the public via the internet that tells the story of the Dennys River, the history of the Dennys River. And I said, yeah, we could do that. And so we partnered on this project. It sort of exploded, and it involved many students in many phases over a period of about a year. And so I'll introduce some of the sort of steps in that process. So we have, what we started out doing involving students is doing GPS field mapping, so taking our GPS course out all over. We spread, I think we had 8 students in that class, and we just fanned out across the landscape, up and down the river and throughout the watershed, and collected GPS locations for I don't know, 80 or 100 different locations. And then our students brought that data back into the lab. Trish, were you in that class? I thought you were. Brought that into the lab, and that was sort of the beginning. It was only the beginning of the data collection phase of the project. In terms of the geospatial aspects. And then a number of students took on taking that database. I should mention also that while we were in the process of doing the mapping piece, the Historical Society volunteers were madly and furiously scanning photographs and maps and other artifacts to include in the digital database, which you'll get to explore in a bit, to include in the digital database and for us to link from the maps. So that was a really critical thing. When Trish talks to you, she'll tell you how that linking process occurred. But several students, and here's one, a map prepared by Graham Clark, who is one of our students here, a GIS major, and verbiage, text was created for each of the maps to go along with it. And so each of the students created these maps, and then we hired Patricia Tilton to, as a work study student, she's now graduated, by the way, to pull the story map together, and I'll let her describe it, but essentially taking all the pieces, right? So we had all the digital archives that the Historical Society had compiled and had worked to create an online database for that material. Then we had all the little maps that each of the students had made. And it was Trish's job to turn that into a database and a story map. I'll let her describe. This is where it gets fun.
So after the class of the summer of 2022, there were still numerous locations that we hadn't mapped yet. So Tora had made us a survey on an app called Survey 123, and we downloaded that on our phones. Colin and I went out to collect the rest of the data. So, sure. So these spots, the blue diamonds right here, are all of the locations that Colin and I had gone to physically to collect that data. The other ones, the yellow dots up here, are the Trumbull data, and the red are the Garmin data. Okay, so the next part of this process was to clean the data so we could merge and link. So in the summer, we had gone out with the Trimble and the Garmin, so there was redundancy of data. So we only needed 1 point for those locations, so that had to go back. I had to go back and delete one of those locations. Also, when we started the project, there were no real standards set for how data was being recorded. So this is just one of the instances. In the town, you can see it's written in the spreadsheet as Charlotte, 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 South Charlotte. So I had to go into the database, the spreadsheet, and make sure that these were the towns that we wanted. So we wanted just Charlotte, not South Charlotte. Another instance was Dennysville showed up as Deesville or Dennysville / Edmonds, or any combination of things. They all had to be unified so that we could pull the data from just those towns. The same had to go for the location types. So we chose cemeteries, industrial, geologic. Some of those had alternate words describing their location. So we had to dial that in, unify all of that data as well. So once that happened, we took the data from the spreadsheet, the data from the Survey 123 app, we took the data from the Trimble and the Garmin, merged them together to create that online layer. And that was how the students built their preliminary maps. So the students that had joined on and had created the maps, they had already built their template. There were a couple maps left over that I had built, just kind of going on what they had made. And then the next step was to create georeferenced historic maps. So that involves taking a historic map and overlaying it on, an accurate map, today, and pinpointing locations, kind of stretching it out a little bit so it lays on top, so you can see exactly what they saw in their time. That's how they mapped it. So you can see the differences and the discrepancies in the accuracy. So there was this one. This one was a little bit harder to see in 3 different maps, and I learned Photoshop super well on doing this. I had to clip out anything that was overlaid and then stitch it together, and then export that out to be worked on in ArcGIS. And then that created the georeference map that you'll see later on for the lumbering. Okay, so we've got all the maps created at this point. So the next big project was to unify the template. So we needed every story map that was made to have some continuity so we wouldn't lose the reader from era to era. So just putting together how we were laying out text, how we were laying out maps is how that went. But we also needed to unify all of these icons for each story map, because in the beginning the students had free reign of what they wanted to put. So it could have just been an icon that didn't really look like it was representative of what the location actually was. So once those were all unified, we decided to throw in the pop-ups. So these had to be configured so you could click on this location right here and it would show you the clue. It'll show you exactly what it is, and there's up to 2 pictures in each pop-up. And it would give you just a summary of what it is, and then underneath of this summary, there is a Learn More link that will take you to the Dennys River Historical Society's their website and the repository, giving you more information on just the icon that you clicked on. So once that was done, it was time to assemble the story map. So we created kind of like a cover page and it was an overview of the map in general and how to use it, and then just our many thanks and the people who had worked on it. And then we had taken every era of the story maps, created and embedded them into that story map. And I'll let Colin show you what that looks like.
No, I think it's you, but I believe I did open the story map in. Oh, do you want me to introduce sort of technically? Okay. So I'm going to hit escape here, and we're going to go to the Dennys River Historical Society website. And here you can see, let me zoom in a little bit. You can see this link to the interactive map. And when that opens, that would be just like somebody writing on the screen. That's right. When that opens, you'll see the story map here available. And we get started. I just wanted to sort of mention how the story map is structured, where there's a sort of beginning page. You can scroll down through it and learn about the project. And then each of these tabs refers to the eras that Colin was mentioning. There's also a final tab looking at the population of the watershed over time. So you can see how it's changed. And so that's all of it. Yes.
As we all know, go ahead. Yes. (1885) Well, what is the oldest photograph that we have in our collection? Is that right to drop on? That's an excellent question, because we ask it as well. Photography was sort of came into being prior to the American Civil War, but it was used somewhat intermittently or sporadically. We have this picture right here is from a collection by a man named Dr. John Shane, who was a Civil War veteran. He grew up in Edmonds, and he took up the hobby of photography. He was a kind of, what's the word? I want to say omnivore. he was interested in everything, and you name it, he was interested. And he was actually both a doctor and a dentist. We had an office here in Machias, but they said he was rarely ever in because he was out doing other things. So photography, this is one of his pictures. The reason we put this picture up, and this isn't the earliest, but this is just a case in point. This is about 1885. But this is the actual mouth of the Dennys River. And if you were to stand here today, and we have, of course, had to remove the trees, there is a house, a little house on this location. It's being rebuilt. This was called the Narrows Cottage. It was built by John Mathey, originally an immigrant from Scotland. And this is Hinkley Point, which became the site of a very famous shipyard, Crochet Brothers Shipyard, about 10 years later, and operated for about 30 years. There are still houses along here. This little ribbon in here is actually the shipyard road, which you could travel to this day. And around the end of the point, this was originally called Potato Point on the first map, is you're heading down towards the Reversing Falls. But one of the discussions we had, and I know we have a little more time than we had before, so was, where do you count the mouth of a river? I mean, this is a good question. The Passamaquoddy River, St. Croix River, there was a lot of discussion about the mouth of that when it came time to sort out the peace, the treaty between the new American country in Great Britain, because it said the mouth of the St. Croix. Well, where is the mouth of the St. Croix? Yes?
Our earliest photograph
Oh, yes, that's right. We will show you that picture later on. We'll come to that. Yeah, that's right. We know because he died in 1857, I think. So 52. Okay. Right. He keeps me straight. I've been his assistant for years, so he can correct me anytime. But it's just a comment on this particular photograph. And speaking of changes over time, one of the things that we deal with, everybody deals with around here, is the rate at which trees grow. And even though these have been cut over probably several times, the trees grow up very, very quickly. Anybody who owns property here has to fight with the trees and the alders. So anyway, another interesting point, and we have a little time. This is the Dennys River, and it still flows in this same direction here. This field right here is now all grown up. The trees are, I would say, probably an overstory of 50 to 60 feet. This has recently been acquired by the Cobscook Shores, by the Butler Foundation, Cobscook Shores, and it's been made into a walking trail. So you can actually go up to the end of Foster Lane, which is the lane that takes you to the end, just off Route 1. And then you can walk right down here, and there's a nice little road, but you can stand right here at the mouth and look out over this part of the mouth of the Dennys River. I was commenting on the question of the mouth of the river. This is the mouth of the river, but the water, of course, keeps flowing. It is tidal here, so it's fresh and salt, depending upon the level of the tide. But we decided we would make, for our purposes, the mouth of the river to be the Reversing Falls, which is several miles beyond this, which is now, of course, part of Pembroke. It's at the end of what we call Layton's Point or Layton's Neck. I mean, it's always arbitrary, but this was the way the original Passamaquoddy would have come. There was an encampment, besides the Tone Camp, there was an encampment at Reversing Falls, and there's also been a lot of archaeology there as well. So we felt that we were within our sort of historical human parameters to indicate that this is the river, that's the bay, but we're following the human movement through this whole area over time and over a space of 9,000 years. So what I'm going to do is literally take you on a tour of just a few sites of the map. And feel free to ask questions. Yes, Stephen. John Shane. Sheehan. Yeah, that's right.
As you know, we had a silver mining controversy in Pembroke recently, and I'm intrigued. Comment or just doctor on all three refining workers.
He was also a professor of geology. He had a great collection of stuff birds. So
polymath.
He was a polymath is the word I was searching for. So we know something of his background, but largely through his photographs and others. But he left us. We know he had what they call a magic lantern, which these were all done on big glass plates. He would, as a Civil War veteran, he was at Gettysburg. He went back to some of the battlefields afterwards and took pictures, and then would show them to people. And we have little slideshows, magic lantern shows. But he left us a collection of about 100 glass plate negatives that were in Dennysville until the owner actually sold them to an antique dealer. And fortunately, Hugh French at the Tides Institute saw them come up at an auction in Portland and recognized that this was a very valuable collection. I mean, literally the glass plate negatives, and from the 1880s and 1890s. And he managed to acquire them and then has shared them with us. So every time you see a John Shane picture here, somewhere in the credits will say, thanks to the Tides Institute of Eastport. And that's why we've credited them as well, because without it's an amazing source. one of the beauties of this whole area, and I would include the whole of Washington County, I think, as a historian, is that the rate of change has been relatively slow. So you can literally stand somewhere like that, and you can look and see the same things that people would have seen back then. We haven't covered everything with asphalt and high rises and so on. It's one of the remarkable, unique factors of Washington County. We've been well preserved in that regard, not in all respects, but at least in many respects. So anyway, we're very grateful to Dr. Shane for that. By the way, Shane is an Irish name, Sheehan, and he stowed away on a ship from Ireland right after the War of Father, yeah, in 1812. John Shane, he's named after his father. His father lived just kind of right about here, but eventually, but he was a teenager, and his aunt and uncle were leaving Ireland, and he climbed on board the ship and didn't let them know he was there until they went away. So he wasn't popular apparently, but they couldn't turn the thing around, so they brought him to Eastport. He grew up in Eastport. He lived in Perry, and then eventually came to Dennysville. And his son, John P. Shane, is the one who is the photographer. That's why we say John Harris Shane. All right, so let's just do a little exploration. A lot of this is just to give you a little feeling for it. So we'll leave the geology. That, by the way, is a picture of the absolute mouth of the Dennys River that's taken just below what is currently a dam, a fish dam that retains the water in Machias Lake. The alewives were swimming up there. That was taken just a few years ago. Tristan, nice job of putting that in. So I'll show you how the map works. That's really what we're going to be doing right now. This era here, as I said, the ancestral Passamaquoddy, this is actually a portrait painting of two Wabanaki Indians, from whence the Passamaquoddy come. And this is the way every era is set up. So we've got 7 eras, and you see this handy little arrow saying, go down, young man. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go down. And we have illustrated the text with what we think of as significant images. So this is the era of the ancestral Passamaquoddy, and this is from all of this is from Donald Socktoma's writing. He's also one of the partners in this project who couldn't be present with us to this day. So we're simply explaining this. I won't try to put it all here, but as we know, the Passamaquoddy and Native Americans in general rely heavily on oral history. And here is Donald recording stories that he heard when he was a young man through his family. So I'll read a little bit here. Here's Machias Lake, here's the Tolompet, the village, and here is the Dennys River. That is it. Our 18-mile river, and then this is the Dennys Bay, this is the Reversing Falls, here's the rest of Cobscook Bay, here's Pleasant Point, and here is Moose Island, and Moose Point, that's capital. So we're just sort of situated here. Through the pen of Donald Socktomah, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Sapiel Selmore, who would have been his great-grandfather, I believe, keeper of the history, speaks. Children, I am going to tell you a story that was told to me by a very old man when I was a young boy. It has to do with creation. It has to do with the land and the water, which is so important to us, because that makes us who we are. Sapiel put extra wood on the fire and started to tell the story of the giant ice age and how summer slowly pushed the grasp of winter farther away from the land of the Passamaquoddy, exposing the landscape around Machias Lake, the village in the Tolompet, meaning our ancestors' place. And then we're commenting here on the archaeology and the kinds of food sources that have been found by the archaeologists: perch, sucker, eels, larger mammals, beaver, muskrat, woodchuck, birds, turtles, and numerous plants, as evidenced by charred nutshells, seeds, and other discarded or recovered plant fragments. The Dennys River was actually called Katonsk, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. If I speak from the European side of things, we tend to be a little more articulate when it comes to consonants. They're a little more guttural. So they would say Gdansk, I would say Katonsk, but it gets the same thing. but it means the place for gathering animal scents. That's what it means in Passamaquoddy. The reason the river is called Dennys is that when the settlers from Massachusetts arrived after the Revolution, they found a band of Passamaquoddy fishing for salmon at the mouth of the Cathan Stream, about a mile and a half, about half a mile above the present river of Dennysville. And the leader of the band introduced himself to them as John Denny. And he actually, we have his signature or his mark identified on some early treaty documents. But they named it Dennys River. So they named it after Passamaquoddy, but he was in all likelihood using a European name, because many of the Passamaquoddies did adopt them. I think they were taking pity on us who couldn't pronounce their names as well, so they would give us a kind of alternate version. But the real name for the river is the place for gathering animal scents. That is for hunting and for trapping. And we know they gathered all the plants as well. Here's a description of how they went down the river in the wintertime. As I said, they were here primarily spring, summer, and fall, but we know occasionally winter. But this is, the nets were made of cedar bark loaded in birch bark packs. The men hiked along the frozen river, now called Dennys River, to the village known as Cobscook. Speaking about coming down to the mouth of the river. Here the canoes were stored for the voyages on the ocean to the many favorite small streams of the frost fish called home. The nets were quickly unloaded and set in the water. Within minutes, the nets were bulging with fish. The baskets were full of fish after a long day, and the tide was making its return. It was time to load the canoe and follow the current back to the Cobscook launch site. We think that's probably a reference to Versing Falls. They were met by many of the other fishermen ready for the hike to the village up the Many-Bems Lake. Arriving back at the village was a happy scene. Families were glad that all had returned safe from a dangerous ocean trip. So we'll keep scrolling down, and there's more to read. I won't read all of this with you. See, we have a new map. Here is the actual location. This is the current village of Many-Bems, but also that is where this village, the village of Tollham, was located. And here's some description of fishing. This is also a picture by a Passamaquoddy from Donald's publications. And as you scroll down, you'll see that it brings up different pictures and maps along the right side of the picture. And here we are. This is largely Tricia's work. So this map, one of the challenges was that we had so many sites, it became very dense. It could become very dense. So each map has a little legend down here. I'll just click on it so you can see what the individual icons mean. Tribal site, natural resource, domestic home, agriculture, seminary. They're colored and shaped for easy recognition. But what we really need to do, and what you will need to do if you're going to explore the map, is use the scroll in buttons here. So let's scroll into this site map. Drag this over. We're in the tribal era, the Passamaquoddy era, so there is no village of Many-Bems other than the fact that this is where this is located. This is strictly tribal land, and the only other things you'll find on the river are natural resource sites for the most part. So let's just click on this and see what happens. This is the current road, by the way. And this is the pop-up. So we'll enlarge the pop-up. That's as large as they get. So that's why you want to make it as big as possible. And as Trish said, there are always, or almost always, 2 images with each site. We didn't want to overwhelm the pop-ups, but there's usually an older image, in this case a drawing, and a contemporary one. This was taken with a drone. One of our volunteers, Jeff Orchard, does drone photography, and this is the same place. This is Many-Bems Lake. This is the Dennys River right here, and this is a little walkway that is being built right at Passamaquoddy to lead people to the location of the village, which was somewhere around here. Donald doesn't like to be specific, not because we don't want people to know about it, but because he doesn't want treasure hunters going in there and digging things up. There's actually a fence around the site, so the site has been returned to the Passamaquoddy. So if you want to actually to visit the site, you need to speak to Donald. He's very happy usually to show people if you can arrange it in advance. The other thing I think is interesting is this other stuff in this picture. Here's this rectangular building, obviously not anything tribal. There's actually an outline of a little fence here too, and these are some storage containers. But this is all from the remediation by the Environmental Protection Agency. This village was rediscovered thanks to a huge environmental mess that was created by a junkyard. It was notorious in the area, but at the time it was made in the 40s and 50s, it was simply collecting government surplus Department of Defense materials. But the junkyard owner, who lived just on the other side of the stream, and then Harry Smith, would literally get these huge transformers filled with oil, tip the oil out on the ground in order to get the metal out of the transformer. And at the time, no one really thought much about it. It was just being done. And there was a lot of other war surplus material. And if you get a chance to go on the site, you can look around. You can find shell casings, not live, coming up out of the ground, 4-inch shell casings, all sorts of stuff. It is actually it is a remarkable site to explore simply because of this. And Jeff Orchard, who took this picture, grew up right over here, and he said he spent many happy hours as a child wandering around picking up arrowheads and World War II artifacts. And this was a potato field at the time. But you'll notice these little white dots here. These are actually wellheads. They were put in and drilled well down below the level of the river and into the bedrock by the Environmental Protection Agency in the very early 2000s. When they began to remove soil, they removed something like 27 million pounds of soil. But as they did, they discovered they were removing archaeological remains. And so everything had to stop, put on pause, while the archaeology moved in and excavated the site. This was actually, at the time, the largest Native American archaeological site investigated in Maine. I don't know if there's a bigger one, but I know that's the way Donald puts it. So here we have the description, aerial view of the ancient Native American village site on Medevacs Lake, occupied 9,000 years ago, up to the time of the American Revolution. That's the date at which their artifacts ceased to be datable. In 2021, it was returned to the Passamaquoddy tribe by the state of Maine. And here is the Learn More. Every pop-up has this, and you click on the underlined word view, and I will show you. Here we have that same image, but in a larger size, and a description of it, artist rendering. And I think I'm going to show you, because we're using digital technology, we can incorporate videos and all sorts of things. There are some other pictures. This is, I'll just pull this one in. This is a picture of an artifact. Donald likes to show it. Anyway, it's about 4 inches long, and he always asks me, "What do you think this is?" And there's no definitive answer, but it's made of stone, and it was found in 4 pieces. Is it a fish? Is it a representation of a sturgeon? Is it a net tool? We don't know for sure, and he doesn't know either. But it is intriguing because it's one of the most pictured artifacts that was found. And then this is simply a piece of birch bark art, probably from the late 19th century, by Toma Joseph, who was a noted birch bark artist. But it shows a happy scene. Here they are living their life in the woods. You can see the trees and the plants all around them. Obviously, Native Americans, they're hunting, they're fishing, and I'm intrigued by just how carefully the plants are. They were obviously great. But these tomahawks, my guess is that the Passamaquoddy were not warlike, but I think the way we hang things on our walls, they hung things on their teeth. So anyway, but it's a happy, I think of it as a happy site. So I'm going to click this off here. Louise, I'm going to move you over. Yeah, there we go. And these are all links to other things. Now this is Donald, we met him.
A verbo is for sharing all kinds of moments.
You can skip it now.
There we go. Okay. So, oh, no thanks. Okay, so we'll listen to Donald for a few minutes explaining the significance of the site to us. That's Ron and that's his wife Barbara. And we're going to put sound.
High they were until was sort of thrown together in this site. And then there were cylinders. I didn't realize how high they were until you mentioned it. But he lives right across the river here.
This was my mechanical education. I spent a lot of time here when it was a junkyard, and it was quite spectacular for a kid. But when they emptied the transformers over here, all 1,200 of them, and put the PCBs in the ground, the old fellow that was doing it said, just go into the ground, there'd never be a problem. Of course, it was legal back then, but just the same, you did make a mess.
Yeah.
Watched a good bit of it happen, actually.
So the government got involved, and sometimes that's a bad thing, but sometimes it's a good thing. So they invested over $26 million onto this 6-acre site to clean it up. First thing they did was remove the debris, and the next thing, anytime they touch soil with government money, they have to notify the tribe, because we have a vested interest. If they're going to move soil, is that an archaeological site? Well, nobody at the time with the government knew it was a site. The tribe always knew this was a site. So they contacted me. Under federal law, they have to contact me. So I came to the site with an archaeologist, and we took 2 steps out, and we were picking up arrowheads, spearheads, left and right. So the whole operation stopped. And we drafted up a plan to do site work here. But the first thing we had to find was where the contaminated soil was. Where is the boundary? Because we can't dig in contaminated soil. It would grow another finger. Or lose a couple fingers. Well, it just so happened the Passamaquoddy village site was in this acre here. The shoreline, right along the fence, all the way up, probably behind Newell, maybe 20 to 30 feet. The contaminated line followed the fence, and it went around. So this was uncontaminated soil here. Wow. So there was probably 20 feet of crossover from the contaminated, so we had to write that off. They said the only way to dig there is they'd have to hire a specialty firm from New Jersey that wear the white suits, the boots, and the gloves, because it was too dangerous. So we conducted 3 years of archaeological work here. It was the largest archaeological project in the state of Maine, based on the dollars and the amount of people that were involved. And it was one of the richest. Almost 9,000 artifacts were found on this site. Everything from arrowheads to spearheads to this unique thing right here. It's a stone carving of a, I told somebody, I want to see if they remember. Sturgeon.
Well, I'll let you follow that through. And there's another video where he's talking about Passamaquoddy culture. So, but I hope that's whetted your appetite. And here he's identified it as a sturgeon, but sometimes he just says, guess what it is, you know. So anyway, there we are. So we have, I'm going to swing Louise back over here. So we're going to go back to this is what happens when you click on Learn More. There isn't a video for every site, but wherever we had opportunities to do it. I think we're just going to have to wait for the computer to do its thing here. And we're going to go back to the interactive map and the discovering the Dennys. And at this point, whoops, oh, I think I went too far back. I'll just scroll back up. So this is what you would do. You just scroll back up. And once you get to the top, you go to the next arrow, which is over here. You can either go back to the web page or over here, and you get to the colonial era. And I'm going to leave some for you to do, because we do have a total of over 450 sites on this map. For an 18-mile river, I think we've done pretty well. But I'd like to go to the lumbering era next, and we'll scroll down to the map. Lumbering era was the heyday of the economy and the society. That's when the population peaked. And I'm going to pull that up a little bit. And the text is there for you to read. You can find it, and you'll see the pictures. Here's this map that Patricia was showing. This is, you may recognize this as the Colby Atlas map of Washington County from 1881. This is just the excerpt that Trish applied over the actual base map that we were working with. But if you just keep scrolling, and you'll see that the same map will vanish and we'll be back here. And now, of course, we have an infinitely, or many more. Yeah, I mean, I'm exaggerating. many more items, and I'm going to show you a spot that's become famous, not only because it references the lumbering era, but because it also ties us into a well-known historical figure. By the way, on the map, this icon here, you can find it here, but it's easier to see here. This is an industrial site. This is a school. There was a schoolhouse here. Yellow house is domestic. Natural resources, a site that has to do with preservation or use of natural resources, is here. And also this pine tree is actually some, Trish, correct me, I think this is actually something different, isn't it?
Yeah, just touch your legend, there you go.
That's recreational, that's right, okay. So we want to get rid of that. Now, of course, I pulled it up and I can't do it. Well, there we go, okay. So we're getting back to this. So we know that in the well-known naturalist, John James Audubon, left for his famous birding trip to Labrador in 1833, but it was preceded by a visit the previous year for a month, when he and his wife and 2 sons stayed in Dennysville with the Lincoln family. And he recorded scenes. He was funding himself, no crowdfunding in those days. Whoops, so I have to go back there. You get used to this, but I have to open it up. So we want to find a site on the Dennys River that it was described by Audubon, and I'm going to, this is our symbol for infrastructure. There's a railroad bridge here, there's the traffic bridge, you will drive over it, Route 86, if you're going in and out of Dennysville towards Marion. But this site here has special interest for us, so let's just click on it, and you'll find the Audubon Dam site. This is a site that he recorded visiting with his family and most of the village in late August of 1832 to watch the destruction of a temporary lumbering dam. The lumberers floated logs down the river in the spring, but invariably a number were caught up on the banks and formed terrific jams. And to enable them to get down through the river, and there's a particular bad gorge here. I actually have a picture of it here. Well, there's one picture of it, and there's another right here. Yeah, this is the scene from the Route 86 bridge, a very rocky, shallow gorge. And the logs would fetch up here, and just piles of them. You'll hear him describe them in a moment. But we'll go back to his description right here. So this is a picture by, again, John P. Shane, our ubiquitous photographer at that particular time. And we also have a contemporary picture of that same spot. If you look carefully, here's a rock right here. Here's a rock right here. That's the same rock. And the lumbermen used that rock, and you're going to hear this account very shortly when Ron reads it, to build this temporary dam across the river, to build up a wall of water that would then be released in a moment and rush through all the heaped up logs. Audubon was describing this for an audience in New York. It was published in the New York newspaper. It's now included in his journals as an essay entitled "The Force of the Water." But Ron, would you like to come up? I'm going to click on Learn More. And you're going to hear in a moment from, thanks to our little, this is the text that he's going to be reading an excerpt from. But we have here a video link to that very site, and you're going to see Dom Winsky, who was the geologist on our project. He and I paddled down the river at one point. He was in the back paddling. I had the easy job of taking pictures in the front of the canoe. But we're standing on, yes, here we are. We're standing
Video.
on that very rock. And Ron, do you want to read what Audubon describes? Please.
Now, this is greatly abridged from his very long article on the spot on the Dennys River, just up from the village itself. This appeared, it was in his diary, it appeared in the New York newspaper, and it appeared in a newspaper in London. He thought this was very interesting. He had traveled everywhere in this country and was deeply interested in this little Dennys River. So, I'll read this to you, but it's much longer. Here the waters of the Dennys River surged through the site of the Lumberman's Dam, described by naturalist John James Audubon in his visit to Dennysville, Maine in 1832. A 10-foot-high barrier of upright planks was erected across the river, braced by two timbers wedged in the rock that's seen in this video behind me. After several weeks, the wedges holding the timbers were knocked loose by two men, and a wall of water careened through the broken dam, lifting a massive heap of tangled logs to the rocky gorge below. In unforgettable language, Audubon described the scene, and he says, "There was a slow, heaving motion in that great mass of logs, as if some monster lay convulsively writhing beneath, struggling with fearful energy to extricate itself from the crushing weight. The gorge filled to its brim, logs rolled, reared and tumbled amidst the foam. They were carried along. Onward it rolled, the emblem of rack and ruin, destruction and chaotic strife. It was to me like watching the rout of a vast army that had been surprised and overthrown. The roar of the cannon, the groans of the dying, and the shouts of the avengers thundered through my brain. In a few hours, all the timber that had lain heaped in the rocky gorges was floating in the big pond of the millers. As we walked back again into town, we talked of the force of the waters. It was a powerful experience for him, and he had had many such experiences, but this had a very deep impression on him. And if any of you is interested in going out in milder weather to see this site, let Colin and me know. We'd be happy to take it.
I don't know if you could see, I was just trying to catch it, the actual impressions in the rock where they placed the abutments are there, and he describes how the lumbermen, two of them, with ropes tied around themselves, one on either side, and they knocked the braces out simultaneously and then hung themselves to the bank so that this whole thing could happen. But the whole village was there, so it gives you a little sense of the interest of the community in all of this. That's 1832.
Good thing there was no OSHA.
Yeah, the OSHA, definitely not OSHA approved. Okay, so there is a little sketch, but thanks to John James Audubon and the magic of digital technology and this the map. And so we're going to go back to the map again. I'm going to click this off, and I'll take you to one more site. This is, we'll go back up to the top because this is where we will find the different parts to the map. And this time we're going to go to the conservation era. And naturally we have more locations here than anywhere. The Historical Society was created in 1987, so we thought, since we're interested in preservation and conservation, our little museum belonged up there. Here's an aerial view of the river from the 1940s. You'll see that there was a bridge, that what was called the lower downstream bridge. That is no longer there, but the stone abutments still are. Anyone recognize what this is? This artifact from the 20th century? the telephone booth at Palmer's store in Medibemps. There is still a phone there, but it's not attached. No, it's not in a booth. It's a public sort of emergency type phone. But according to Jeff Orchard, there was a lot of socializing and other shenanigans that went on in and around that phone booth. He grew up there. And here are some contemporary scenes around Dennysville. These are some of the early houses. This was a Lincoln house, and this is also a Lincoln house, a mill house there. One is at the what I would call the head of the river, the tidal end, and this is above where the Lincoln's mills were. The Lincolns were the family that actually acquired townships 1 and 2, which are now Dennysville, Pembroke, and Perry, and their responsibility was to settle a number of families and to develop the area economically so that it could be self-sufficient. But they were able to not only build their own houses, but they owned and operated most of the attractive mill seats. And here's some of the contemporary businesses we felt they should be in there as well. A used car dealer, no Eastern Plumbing and Heating, now R.H. Foster. A computer, we actually have a computer place. And I mentioned why we begin in the 1830s. In 1836, the Dennys River Salmon Club was built. This is the structure because they became aware that the salmon population was diminishing dramatically, and the fishermen who wanted to enjoy the sport. The Dennys River had been famous for salmon fishing from the time of the Passamaquoddy. When the Lincolns first arrived, which is in May of 1786, they said they were so thick in the river, it looked like you could walk across the river stepping on salmon. That's how thick they were. And by the 1930s, the numbers were dramatically reduced. And the fishermen created the Salmon Club and now it's just called the Sportsman's Club, but it is actually no longer in service. It was turned over, I think, to the Atlantic Salmon Federation, with the understanding it could be used if needed. And there's some pictures here that Trish has put into, these are some of the efforts of conservation as we became aware that natural resources are not an endless supply. Scroll down to continue the story. We'll do that. And we have a public library, which we're very pleased. Now, here we are. This is a familiar view of the site in Medibemps. And also, this is the infamous junkyard that is now closed, that is down the road from that as well. So let's just go down to the map. These are some children visiting museums, school children from the Edmonds Consolidated School. The map will show up shortly. I think you overlaid this as a USGS map, didn't you? Because they're remarkable sources of history and they're very easy to find. So here we have Medibemps, here we have Dennysville, Lower Dennysville as it's sometimes known. So once again, we have an absolute plethora of sites. So we'll need to scroll in, but I want to draw your attention to one in particular, and then I'll turn things back over to Tora. Time-wise, I think we're all right. So once again, because the village itself has been largely untouched by the passage of time, not completely, but largely, we have a number of historical houses and locations. Let's see if I can find myself here. Yes, this is what we want to look at. Harris Road, Woods Road, no, sorry. See, I get a little dizzy sometimes doing this. I'll walk here. Here we are. Okay, but we're going to scroll in. Just if it looks too much, just keep scrolling in, and you'll find that things will spread out over time. So this is the road that you drive on if you're going through Dennysville. Notice the Salmon Club Road down here to the Salmon Club, which is located at the end of that road. I'm just showing you a picture of it. That's we put under natural resource. How to categorize these things was often often a discussion that we had. I want to show you a particular site on the river that is key to the whole development of the town. And this is, we'll use our industrial icon, but it has nothing to do with chimneys and factories. This is a dam that was built. So when the logs came down the river, it collected them, and there were mills on the dam. And over time, the factory buildings changed, and this building here, I've got that correct.
If you pull the map down, you'll be able to see the topo.
Yeah, okay, that was a filling station. I'm going to, this location here is marked as a filling station, that's a commercial icon, but the building was actually located here before it moved over here, and I will show it to you. This is the Dennysville Lumber Company. It's a great picture, not by John P. Shane, he was gone by this time, but it gives us a view of the workers. They just rebuilt the mill shortly after it had burned, and the fire mill buildings were not long lived. But let's go to the Learn More, and we're going to take a better look at this picture. This is the same building, believe it or not. It was moved across the road and became an art gallery. I'm going to slide down here. This is the picture we were looking, the original picture we were looking at. It's winsome, I think. The Dennys River Lumber Company. I knew this girl. Her name was, she was a girl here, about 7 or 8 years old, Marie Mahar. I knew her as a very old lady. She had become a teacher, retired back to Dennysville, and she recalled the incident exactly. She said this was her uncle, and she was coming back from school. This was in September of that year, and her uncle said, "Marie, would you like to be in a picture?" And sure, this was a chunk of stone, and here she is with all the men around her, but it gives you some idea of just how many people these mills employed. It always amazed me, this shed roof hasn't collapsed. You can find the owner of the mill, or at least the manager is right there. He lived in the mill house nearby, and there you can tell him by his shirt and tie, and there are a few others, but this building was the last remnant of the lumber business in Dennysville. And as the large trees were cut, the Lincolns sold off their interests in the mills. This was purchased by a consortium of people, and eventually the consortium was bought out by the Dead River Company, which in those days was interested in lumber and lumberlands. And they simply wanted to remove the remaining timber that was accessible. And when that was gone, these mills were no longer used. And in one day's time, they closed down this and several other mills in Dennysville, and everybody that you see here was put out of work. Marie said what struck her most was the silence. She said the silence. When the mills were running, she said there were bells, there was noise, there was the smell of freshly cut sawdust. You could tell what they were cutting, but suddenly there was just nothing. And that was on a Sunday morning in April. Am I getting the right number? Saturday morning in April. See, I told you, correct me. In 1930. And so we end the lumbering era at that point and begin the era of conservation. But let's just go back and see what has become of this building. Because, no, that's not it. Hang on. Here we are. The building was moved across the road. It became a Gulf oil distributorship. And then it became a chicken barn. It's very solidly built. And then it became a community youth center in the 1950s. And then when that youth center had finally served its last spaghetti supper, and the new facilities were being built elsewhere in town, Church Parish Hall, it was sold to a private owner who has turned it into an art gallery.
Who actually lives in the Lincoln House.
Yeah, she actually lives in the Lincoln House. Here's the end of it. This is that same mill building. They've had some work done. She has art on display throughout the summer months, and here you are. And this is the work of a local Passamaquoddy artist. When I say local, I mean in Dennysville. So you'll see how inventive and creative Yankee people are. But I think I should probably stop because we've got some more to see. So I will just close this out, and there you are. I'll return us to there you go. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right, and let's see. I just want to, Louise, I think you're writing on the screen by mistake, so I'm gonna, if you have a column of tools on the left-hand side of your screen, you might want to close that. And so let me just find where we're at. Here we are. And so Louise, we're ready for you. And just tell me when you want me to advance the slide.
I will do that. Can you hear me? That's the first question.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
No. She's having issues.
Okay, okay. If you can hear me, I will just talk and you can put questions in the chat if that's okay.
Go for it.
So what we're looking at here is sort of another way to go at this. There are so many moving parts in this project. You've heard from Trish, you've heard from Colin, you've heard from Tora, and we've got a website, and we haven't even heard from the designer of the website, but we have a website, we have maps, we have a catalog of our mainly photographic and archival collections, we have the stories, we have a database. It's, as I keep saying, a lot of moving parts. So and so what that means is that there are many ways to get to stuff. And you saw one, Colin was kind of showing you the different ways that you can see the various aspects of this. But there is one basic thing that the website makes possible, and that's linking the collections, the pictures, to the map. And these are actually involve two different pieces of software. It's a totally different operation, but they're linked. And we can thank Trish for that. And I would like to acknowledge that because the amount of work she put in making that happen was amazing. So we're continuing to add photographs and some archival materials. And as we do, they could show up on the map. If you look on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see three little thumbnails at the bottom, and those are additional photos. And so as we put them in, they can show up on the map linked display. And so that's a pretty cool feature. So what we've got here, just to quickly go through, I'm just going to give you an example and then we'll talk about how we get there. Down at the bottom, circled on the thumbnail sketch of the map itself, you see circled in red an icon which refers to sort of commercial activity like stores. And you click on that, and eventually you get to this picture of the Gardner store in Dennysville, Maine. And then you see description of the context and history of that. And it's, so you can get a lot of information. So the next slide, please, and then we'll see some other ways. And so what you're seeing here is those three little thumbnail photos on the bottom right in the previous slide. And so these photos are really important because they illustrate some sort of basic historical facts like change over time. You have the original store as it was earlier, and then you have the renovated store in the 1910s, and then in the 1930s, you have the gentleman gathered around the Cracker Barrel in the store, which I think is an iconic picture, mainly because some of my family members are in that picture. So anyway, so what they do is they also show the social importance of the sites on the map. It's not just ancient history. These are real people who did things and gathered around the Cracker Barrel or whatever. So you see that here, and you see the social importance of stores as gathering places. So you see a lot of stuff that you cannot necessarily gather from just looking at the map. So I like to think of the map in a way, I mean, it's many things, but in a way, it's kind of like a walking tour. You could use this as or a driving tour. You could just kind of follow it and see what happens, right? Serendipity. So if we'll take the next slide, we'll show an example of that. So this slide shows different ways that you can learn things. And as I said, one is serendipity, like the driving tour, the walking tour. If you clicked on a house, if you drove by this icon on the left-hand side on the thumbnail of the map, you see an icon for a house, and you click on it, and gee, it's Theodore Lincoln's house. You learn about Theodore Lincoln. You see a picture of him if you click on this icon. And then if you go into the story map that's associated with the population, you can see the manuscript census for Plantation 2, which was what the 1810 census reveals that area was called, i.e. Dennysville. And it shows Theodore Lincoln's household, which is 7 men and 9 females. That's a lot of people in one house. Who are they? Do we know? There's some listings of them obviously in the census, but there's some, again, going back to the history that we can see, there's some larger issues here that can be interpreted by the viewer. So if I could have the next slide, we'll see where that takes us.
Oh, I don't think we have a next slide.
Okay, that's all right. I guess it's not in the slideshow. That's okay.
Oh, here it is. Oh, for some reason what happened? I don't know what happened.
That's okay. It's
There we go. Now we're good. Sorry, my bad.
That's good enough. That's great. So anyway, so you can, for example, in the maybe you know about the Lincolns, and it's not serendipity. You're looking for stuff about the Lincolns, which is another way, of course, to do it. You can search. For example, you search under Lincoln Mills, and this is what you get. You get the map that shows you see the little 4 icons at the bottom left or bottom of the map, which represent industrial operations. And so one of those is links to photos of the Lincoln Mills. And then if you want more information, you could read the story map essay, and you could learn about the context of the Lincoln family businesses. You can also, if you read the population essay, these stories, you could see that there is, if you look on the right-hand side on the sort of the dark gray, there's one of these bars that gets way out on the right-hand side, and that refers to young men, right? And what that refers to is when I said there are all these people in Theodore Lincoln's house, some of them presumably were brought as servants, workers, whatever. But there are a lot of young men working in Dennysville in the 1880s in the mills. And so again, you see some context and social history that explains what's going on at a particular place in a particular time. So these maps and the associated linkages, the collections, the videos, the photographs, all of that, the census information that's in the story map on population, or the story about population, that just adds a richness to all of this. It's not just dots on a map. In some ways, the map is an entry into all of this stuff. And it requires some diligence to sort of dig deep, as with anything historical, and the map is your entry into that. I want to stop now because I think we're almost out of time. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Tora and Colin, and hope you explore the map more later on.
Thank you, Louise. So I did want to just wrap up, and we're really out of time, and I want to have time for at least a couple questions. But I did want to mention that this is a digital humanities project. It's a project that brings to life history in ways that are accessible, searchable, explorable, and in ways that dusty old, bins of paper and things aren't. And this is a growing, excuse me, a growing area in geography. And I just wanted to point out, and you can, if you'd like to reach out to me, I'm happy to provide you with a link to this slideshow so you can access this. But here you can see another kind of story map that another historical society has used. This is an even deeper project that a former student of mine, Maya Cruz, who's now Dr. Maya Cruz and is off she's now an international scholar of the Holocaust. In our class, she did spatial analysis of the activities of Jews who had escaped from Nazi encampments in Poland, and trying to understand where they would have hid and what sorts of factors would have been included. So she built models of this, and it's a sort of extension of the digital humanities, opportunity. So I just wanted to mention that this is a sort of burgeoning area, and maybe we should open it up for questions now. Yes.
I would stop sharing so we see.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes, Inez.
So I noticed you have icons of different forestry, whatnot. I see you have agriculture. Can you select that as a layer and just see agriculture?
In the story maps, the way we have it set up, no.
Okay.
But there are maps behind it.
Okay.
I don't know if you're able to open the maps. It's constrained so that folks unlike you who haven't taken years of GIS can just poke around and understand, just click on things, right?
Yeah.
But that means that it's kind of constrained. However, in sort of the map behind the scenes, it is searchable and
But
filterable.
But we still can see the history of that. There's more agriculture there than I've been.
Yeah.
That's what
Yes.
I'm curious about, to get an overview of that. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I have one other. Is this project being done on other rivers and streams in Washington County?
No, not yet.
Not yet, not yet.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first moved here, I lived on Bog Brook, and it was so obviously had been used by native people going down the ocean or the bay. It would be wonderful to map those different streams. Yeah, so maybe somebody's gonna be doing that sometime.
Well, historical societies, not really all over the country. There's a sprinkling of historical societies around who have been doing maps like this. This is a pretty major undertaking because it meant more than just creating a sort of basic story map. This meant digitizing the collections of the historical society, and that is sort of a step beyond what a typical historical society story map would be. But this kind of project is available in really tiny and really larger ways, right? And so far, we've had a few sort of abortive attempts to make a walking tour story map for the town of Machias, but it's never really come to fruition. The vision right now for downtown Machias is when we do the revitalization and the river walk, to include funds for a robust story map walking tour with QR codes, and you can link to the story map on your phone and that sort of thing. So that's a whole other, other way to use this. Yeah.
Very, very curious, great project, great presentation, fabulous. So question, I'm very curious about fisheries history, and I don't see any other than a brief mention, and it has sort of two aspects to it. Of course, the failure of the salmon fishery.
Yes.
But also the modification of the system through years, because is it true that the water levels in the lake went up with a dam at the head of the river? Has this been discussed, et cetera?
To a certain extent, yes. We know that when the lumbermen arrived, they literally dammed Medibanks Lake. The Passamaquoddy have their way of explaining it. Said they made the lake flow in the other direction. There was the Dennys River would have been cut through, speaking late in geological time, would have been cut through maybe around 10,000 years ago, we don't know at what point, because as the water, as the sea level sank and the land, we presume, rose, the lake was just a drainage basin. But there's another river or stream called Stony Brook that goes from the north eastern side of the lake up toward the St. Croix watershed. And when the lumbermen arrived on the Dennys River, they wanted the water to flow down the Dennys River. So they literally came, and this was about 1800 or even 1790s, and they built a dam, because there was no gates in it, across the mouth of Stony Brook, so that the water level in the lake would rise and more water would then flow down the Dennys River. That has in turn created a certain amount of controversy in our time, because one, there are cottage owners and they're fishermen, they want to have lots of water in the lake. The dam that exists, and that picture in the geology section shows that, the water flowing out of that. The people downstream want to have water as well. So who gets the water? And in the summertime, there are lots of lakes, lots of rocks in that lake, and if you're pleasure boating, it's terrible. You're going to bump into them sooner or later. But it was also a question for the Passamaquoddy and fishing. Alewives are coming back up into the river, and there were lots of them. I was watching them. But one of the questions I've always had is, well, what influenced the Passamaquoddy to abandon that village site? Was it just the arrival of some scattering of European Americans, or was it the fact that their food sources were becoming depleted? So that's where we just don't know enough about it. But the river itself has been fished for salmon continually for 9,000 years. It's one of the constants in the river, even though we'd like to say we have more biologists than salmon in the river right now.
Those specifically, I'm curious about river straightening. And I know personally that the rock has been dynamited probably numerous times. I'm just curious if that's been part of your thinking.
Well,
and we'll keep it short. We can talk offline.
Yeah. Bill, Cunning, has done some work on that.
Who?
What's his name?
Steve. Kenneth?
Yes. That's sorry.
Yes, yep. So Project Share and the Downey Salmon Federation are both involved in habitat restoration in the Dennys River watershed for salmon in particular, but river run fish in general. Yep. And also, the Downey Salmon Federation now owns the Dennys River Sportsman's Club, and that is under renovation as we speak. It's being renovated right now this spring. Yes.
Tora, could we have your email address so I can send you my 3 pages of questions?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's having lunch with Tora
Johnson. Oh, great. Well, it's tjohnson@sunrisecounty.org.
And no period between the T and the...
Yep, just T Johnson.
T Johnson at sunrisecounty.org.
Yep.
And this is an ongoing project?
Well, the university, I'm not even at the university anymore, right. But the university's part in it is done until, a new project comes up. But it is.
We are interested in being able to update the information. So when we get more pictures or our facts get corrected or whatever, we've designed it so that with a certain amount of effort, we can go back in and change things and add pictures.
Chew your ear off on the way back from former Dennysville and Pembroke.
Yeah. Sure.
Yep. So we need to wrap up, and I'm sure we'll sort of hang after a little bit and answer any remaining questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louise.
Don't forget to vote, everybody.